depressed. This country has lost its confidence. This country has lost its mojo. This country has lost its inspiration. This country has lost its motivation. This country has lost its sense of national purpose. And I feel that I'm uniquely qualified to try to initiate a new chapter in our history based on the kind of regenerative energy that actually we all have within us. We are a regenerative people. The American people know how to be resilient. The American people know how to start new things. That's what we do. And you see this in every area of our lives. You see this in business, you see it in education, you see it in health and wellness, you see it in therapy, you see it in spirituality and religion. We're very good at doing things different by Saturday if they weren't working on Wednesday. But our political system is not regenerative. Our political system is stuck back in there in the 20th century sometime. And for those of you who are college students particularly, as a woman who is no longer young, I say to you probably on behalf of all of us here, there's no reason for you to live your life burdened by or at the effect of ideas that were bad in the last century. There is no reason for us to be carrying them forward. And for those of us who are old enough, I'm not romanticizing American capitalism before 1980, but I want you to know it wasn't always like this. There was a time, maybe before you were born, but there was a time in our lifetimes when at least the country knew we were supposed to try to be good. Even American capitalism was supposed to try to be good. The idea was that if an American corporation, somebody had worked for that corporation for decades, the social consensus was such that that company theoretically should care whether or not that person had a dignified retirement. But this country's so down. This country has forgotten our sense of national purpose. We've forgotten that the whole point was that we were supposed to try to be the good guys. And all of us know you can't be great if you're not good. So this country has taken a terrible blow. That started all the way with the Kennedy assassination, and then economically, starting in 1980, a terrible, terrible, amoral economic theory, trickle-down economics. It has corrupted our government. It has hijacked America's value system because it posits that if American corporations, unfettered by any kind of ethical or moral consideration, any sense of ethical or moral responsibility to people, if government will just get out of the way, if government will deregulate, that this economic system can organize our society. And man, it has organized it. It has organized it to the point where we're not even a functioning democracy anymore. It has organized it to the point where we are, for all intents and purposes, a corporate aristocracy. The bottom line of our governmental functioning is not, at this point, advocacy for the health, the safety, the security, or the well-being of us, or our children, or other people in the world. Our government, for all intents and purposes, advocates through tax policies, through corporate subsidies, through all manner of domestic and international policies. Our government does more to advocate for the short-term profits of huge multinational corporate entities than it does to advocate for the safety and the health and the well-being of the people, the safety and the health and well-being of our children, the safety and the health and well-being of other people in the world, and the safety and the health and the well-being of our planet. You put together all of these hits that we've taken, the hits to our confidence, the hits to our inspiration, the hits to our mission. You put this together with this incredibly amoral, unjust economic system, and what you have is a country that is so down, a country that needs to make a decision now. Who will we be? And if we're going to decide who we will be as we go through this identity crisis, if we are going to decide that we will begin a new chapter and we will rise up and we will start again and we will end this aberrational chapter in our history, then the American people are going to have to step in. Because what I just described to you will not change by itself. What I just described to you is entrenched. What I just described to you is held tight and under tight control by a political and corporate and media establishment, which amounts at this time to nothing short of a soft tyranny. We are in New Hampshire. Theoretically, New Hampshireites don't say yes to that. It is time for the American people to do exactly what we did during the American Revolution, It is time for the American people to say what we said to slavery. It is time for the American people to say what we've said to the suppression of women. It is time for the American people to say what we said to segregation and institutionalized white supremacy in the American South. It is time, once again, for the American people to rise up and peacefully, stylishly, and lovingly say, hell no, we're not doing that anymore. What I just described to you will not occur because we have a policy here or a plan there. What I just said to you will not occur because we make incremental changes. We need a fundamental pattern disruption with the economic and social and political patterns that now dominate our national and international functioning. This is what we do in America. This is what the abolitionists did, arising from right here in New Hampshire. This is what the women's suffragettes did. This is what the civil rights movement did. At the times, and there have been times before, this is not the first time, when our government was functioning in a way that was so divergent from our democratic principles and from our own goodness and decency, when there has been that huge gap between who we are as people, the goodness of a human being, and the way our government functioned, whether it was slavery or genocide or suppression of women or institutionalized white supremacy. The government has never said, okay, we'll change. That's not the way it's ever happened. It's always happened because the people rose up and the people stepped in, whether it was the abolitionists or the women's suffragettes or the civil rights movement. We are not the first generation to have to deal with institutionalized assaults on everything we are supposed to be in this country. Let's just not be the first generation to wimp out on doing what it takes to put this country back on track. And the abolitionists did not say pretty please, and the women's suffragettes did not say pretty please, and the civil rights movement did not say pretty please. They did not say, given that you are an entrenched political status quo that is more interested in somebody's money than in democracy, would you please within that do the best that you can do? Because that's all we're doing now. We're saying, given that the political status quo is so completely ruled and dominated by corporate money, within that, would you pretty please give us, I don't know, enough food to eat? Would you give us, please, I don't know, enough insulin that I can survive? Would you please, I don't know, give me enough of an education that I won't be shackled for decades with college loans? Would you please, I don't know, give me just enough eradication of contaminants in my water or carcinogens in my food or toxins in my air that, I don't know, I could maybe expect for me and my children to have a reasonable lifespan? Do you say pretty please for those things? In the richest country in the world, do you say pretty please for those things? We have been trained to ask for too little. We have been trained to demand too little. We need to revisit. This is what John Adams said we needed to do. He said we need visit, he said, hopefully every year. He wanted this to be July 4th. He said we should revisit our first principles. Our first principles are written in our Declaration of Independence, and they form our mission statement. But they've become frozen. They're inscribed on marble walls. They're printed in parchment somewhere, behind glass, in museums, but they're not alive in our hearts anymore. And if a principle's not alive in your heart, it loses all moral force. Power is not in your hands anymore if it's not in your head and it's not in your heart. So I think we should go over the first principles of the United States as articulated in the Declaration of Independence, because you and I in our generation have to decide, do we mean them? Do we mean them anymore? Because if we're just going to throw them out the window, I think we should just maybe have a conversation about that. We should at least decide. Number one, all men are created equal. Number two, God gave all men inalienable rights of life and of liberty and the pursuit of happiness. This is where it really gets juicy. Governments are instituted to secure those rights. And number four, if God's job, it is the right of the people to alter it or abolish it. I'm not saying we should abolish it, ladies and gentlemen, but I sure am saying we should alter it, and we should alter it now. As president, this is how I see it. This is what we will do if you choose to make me president. First of all, we need to repeal that 2017 $2 trillion tax cut that gave 83 cents of every dollar to the richest corporations and individuals in this country. There is no proof, there's no evidence it will ever even pay for itself. All it is a continuation of the massive transfer of wealth into what is the 1% of the American population that now owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. During the 1970s, this wealth inequality didn't even exist. All of this started with this rush towards trickle-down economics in the 80s. It has created a situation that's the largest wealth inequality since 1929. And this is not just numbers. This is not just hard data. This is people's lives we're talking about here. This is a situation where 93 million people in the United States live near poverty. This is a situation where 13 million children in the United States are hungry. 100,000 children in the United States are homeless. We have millions of American children who go to schools where they don't even have glue sticks and paper. Schools where they don't even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. This is a vast sea of human suffering. Forget anything like close to their freedom and their right to pursue happiness. We have millions of American children who are living with what psychologists say is a chronic PTSD that is no less severe than the returning veteran from Afghanistan or Iraq. We're going to repeal that 2017 tax cut. We will put back in the middle class tax cut. We will stop the corporate subsidies. They're ridiculous. Martin Luther King said if they give it to poor people, they call it a handout. If they give it to rich people, they call it a subsidy. We gave $26 billion to oil and gas alone last year. Why are we doing this? It's just because we just are. And that's why those of us who are older want to say to those of you who are younger, it didn't used to be this way. There was a time when there would have been a huge national guffaw. But now it's just kind of, well, the way things are. It's important that those of us who are old enough to tell you who aren't that old to know, actually, it wasn't this way all the time. This is an aberration, and we need to end this aberrational chapter of our history. In addition to those two things, we need to say that the United States government, now look how this works. The undue influence of money on our government is so great. Just to give you an example, last year alone, big pharmaceutical companies lobbied to the tune of $284 million. Oil and gas lobbied to the tune of $125 million. Now, when these huge multinational corporate overlords, oil companies, gas companies, food companies, chemical companies, gum manufacturers, big pharmaceutical companies, health insurance companies, and defense contractors, when they lobby with all those tens of millions of dollars, it's not a charitable donation. They want a quid pro quo. One of the quid pro quos that Big Pharma got is that our own government, our own lawmakers gave away to Big Pharma the right to negotiate for lower drug prices. This while we have Americans who cannot afford their insulin. So we take back that power and we tell Big Pharma to stay in its lane. And then we say to the military, which I'm a big fan of. My father fought in World War II. Nothing that I'm saying is a criticism of military decisions. These are political decisions I have a problem with. We say to the military, how much do you need? How much do you need to protect our homeland? Every dollar they say they need, I believe they should get. But you know those hundreds of millions of dollars on top of that are not there for our military security, but are there pretty much only to provide short-term profit maximization for defense contractors? That needs to go. That's the domination by the military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower warned us about. In addition to that, I agree with the 3% tax on people who have $1 billion and more. If they made their money righteously, I'm happy for you guys. Don't worry about anybody, they won't feel it. Then we should also say to people who have over 50 million, I agree with that wealth tax as well. 2%, please. And I think it's also important for us to remember there are a lot of very, very, very wealthy people in this country who agree with this. Not every rich person is a greedy bastard. And I don't believe that the average person who creates wealth in this country wants to think that it's at the expense of other people having a chance to. So those are the things that we're going to do to begin the process of holding capitalism accountable. I'm not an anti-capitalist. I believe in capitalism with a conscience, but a virulent strain of capitalism has both corrupted our capitalism and corrupted our government. A capitalism that says that only short-term profit maximization for stockholders, even if it's at the expense of the worker, at the expense of the environment, at the expense of the community, that should prevail. No, it's not. It's heartless. It's soulless. It is amoral. And an amoral economic system always leads to immoral consequences. We should have a conscience as individuals, and we should have a conscience as a nation. Conscience and goodness and integrity and compassion should guide not only our personal lives, those things should also guide our domestic and our international policies. And if those things of goodness and integrity do not guide our personal lives, we're going to be in trouble someday. And when those things do not guide our national policies, then our nation is in trouble someday, and that day has already arrived. None of those things I mentioned were all created by Donald Trump, but all those things created Donald Trump. Once we have the things I just said, once we do the things that I just said, we're going to have some cash on hand. First thing we're going to do is to rescue those children. That's the biggest morality breach in this country, that in the most powerful country in the world, the richest country in the world, that we are allowing chronic trauma on the part of millions of American children. That needs to stop. I'm going to have a Department of Children and Youth. We need a massive realignment of our investment in the direction of America's children. I want every school to be a palace of learning and culture and the arts. I want to stop the practice by which we primarily base our educational funding on property taxes. That needs to stop. In addition to that, and remember, this is all about beginning a period where we wake up and we rise up and we reclaim our sense of national purpose. We need to take a big ship and turn it around. That's one major pillar, is that we are going to front end have a massive realignment of resources in the direction of our children. Number two, we must have a World War II mass mobilization in order to address the climate crisis. We must, in the next 12 years, reverse climate change, and what we need to be in the United States is a leader in a global green revolution. We must do this. It's not a matter of maybe, kind of, sorta. It's a matter of we must. It's a matter of something that must happen, because if we do not take this kind of radical action in the next 12 years, then within 15 or 20 years, we could be seeing a level of massive social collapse unlike anything we've seen in the modern era. From massive food shortages, economic collapse, whole swaths even of continents perhaps that are uninhabitable because of the heat, where food cannot be grown. From whence come economic, environmental refugees who have no place to live. Right now, we have 63 million displaced people, refugees on this planet, the largest refugee crisis since World War II. If we allow this climate crisis to continue unanswered, then what we could have is hundreds of millions. We need a World War II level mass mobilization. This is the kind of thing. The Paris Accords now are almost like kindergarten, and we're getting to the point where even the Green New Deal is high school. We need to take it all the way. Mass mobilization. Next thing we need to do is to recognize that our country's basic national security agenda is not driven by any kind of a peace plan, any kind of an effort to wage peace so that possibly our children or our children's children could ever experience peace on earth. Quite the opposite. Our national security agenda is based on constant preparedness for war. I don't know, I guess the idea is that maybe if you do that enough, you'll back up into peace. That's so 20th century. And like I said to you young ones, there's no reason for you to live burdened or at the effect of bad ideas from the 20th century. You can't just treat symptom, you have to treat cause. And you've got to see yourself in the mirror. This country needs to look at itself in the mirror. When you have a national security agenda that is based mainly on profits for defense contractors, what you are is a country that has even given any effort at moral leadership throughout the world. Right now, for the sake of $360 billion in an arms sale to Saudi Arabia, we are even now giving aerial support to a war, a genocidal war, by which that murderous dictator crown prince in Saudi Arabia is waging a genocidal war against Yemen, in which tens of thousands of people have starved, many of them children. When Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, was asked how could we do that? How could we, the United States, participate in a genocidal war? His response was that sometimes you can have strategic partnerships, he said, with people who do not share your values. No, you can't. That means you have no values. And that is what has happened in this country. Our domestic policies and our international policies, they're not driven by values anymore. They're not driven by democratic ideals anymore. They're not driven by humanitarian values anymore. They're driven by short-term profits. And that can only be stopped if we, the people, stop it, because the political system is so beholden to those corporate profits for their donation. We need a break that can only come from a rising up of the people. I will have a Department of Peace as well as the Department of Defense. Right now, we spend $760 billion a year on our military. We spend $40 billion a year on the State Department, which is development, diplomacy, and mediation. Within that $40 billion, you have $17 billion that goes towards the USAID. That's long-term development and humanitarian assistance. And then also within that $40 billion is less than $1 billion for our peace-building agencies. Can you just take medicine, or do you not also have to cultivate health? You can't just prepare for war. Do we need a strong military? Of course we do. But the military should be like a good surgeon. Do we need a good surgeon on hand? Of course we do. But you avoid surgery if you can, and you try to cultivate your health. We must wage peace. And that's why we should have a Department of Peace. We should have a peace academy. Just like we have a military academy where people go and they study the professional arts of waging war, we need to have a peace academy where people develop the professional expertise of waging peace, which is expansion. You wage peace by expanding economic opportunities, expanding educational opportunities, expanding anything that helps people thrive, that reduces violence, particularly against women, that ameliorates unnecessary human suffering. You see, that is the purpose of government. The purpose of government should be to help people. We've made helping people wrong. We act like any helping people is enabling people. Any helping people is codependency. No, it's not. No, it's not. All public policies should be based around the idea of what helps people thrive. Large groups of desperate people should be seen as a national security risk, whether it's in a corner of the United States somewhere or in some other corner of the world. Desperate people do desperate things. You can't just treat the symptoms that arise because of all that societal malfunction. You have to treat the cause, remove and reduce the human despair. That's why people should have universal health care. That's why people should have free college. That's why people should have the eradication of these college loans. Because when people soar, when people are able to actualize their dreams, when people are able to access their own creativity and productivity, guess what happens? Peace and money. That's where money comes from. The creativity and the productivity of the American people, not a bunch of corporate aristocrats dropping crumbs from their table in the form of job creation. It's such a paternalistic paradigm. I don't look at it that way. I think the American citizen should say to the corporate aristocrats, give me free health care. Give me a good education. Give me a fair shot at it. I'll create my own damn career. That's where money comes from, and that's where peace comes from. Give people a chance to work in a job that they love rather than a job that they just need to have in order to pay off their college loans or just so that because they need those benefits. Let people have jobs that they love and jobs where they can make money enough from one job that they could actually go home at night, can you imagine, and have the bandwidth and the energy to be able to have the space and energy to be there for their spouse, for their lover, for their friend, for their partner, for their children who are saying, Mommy or Daddy, will you read me a bedtime story? Give people a chance so that they're happier at work, so that they're happier employees and happier employers. That's how we will have peace in a community, and that's where we will have greater prosperity for all. Listen, everybody's talking about this mental health crisis all the time. Of course we have a mental health crisis. I have a great idea for the best way to address the mental health crisis. Stop driving people crazy. Because that's what our public policy does. It doesn't support people thriving and being happy. It actually thwarts. It actually thwarts the capacity of people to be happy. When you have millions of people living every single day, not knowing what will happen if they get sick, not knowing what will happen if their children get sick, not knowing what will happen, how they're going to send their kids to college, or how they're going to get out from under those college loans. Like, of course people are anxious. Duh. Of course people are tense. Duh. Of course people are depressed. Duh. This is America. We're not supposed to be just a bunch of tense, anxious people without dreams and without hope and without inspiration. But that's where we are. Way, way too many people are in that place. Way too few people in America are able to dream their dreams. And if you are in the club of people who are able to dream their dreams, and I'm in that club of people who are able to dream their dreams, I got lucky. But I got lucky for a reason. Somebody helped me. And there was another reason over there. Somebody helped me. And another reason over there. Somebody helped me. Everybody needs some help. And children certainly need help. You can't tell people to pick up a child to pick themselves up by their bootstrap when they don't even have boots. And so we need to completely shift the paradigm from a government that serves only multinational corporate interests to a government that once again is of the people and by the people and for the people. We need to shift from an economic bottom line to a humanitarian bottom line. And this will not only improve the state of our economy, it will improve the state of our humanity. This will not happen quickly. We have really, really gone far into a dark and shadowy place where there is so much inbuilt economic and social injustice in this country. But we can declare for ourselves. We can wake up. We can get what's happened here. And in order to make those changes occur, we need to do more than just change a policy here or change a policy there. We need a national awakening. We need a national sense of purpose again. We need to all realize that we have a very, very big ship that we need to turn around, but we can do it. It's not going to happen in one 4-year period. I don't think it's going to all happen within the period of any one presidency, even if that president has 2 terms. It's probably going to be a big 20-year process, but we can do this. And when we do it, it's going to be a whole different chapter of American history in front of us. We're going to have ended an aberrational chapter that we'll look back in history and go, that was a rough 40 years. But what's going to happen is that we're going to see what we have seen in this country before. You know, Winston Churchill said that Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other option. And that's been true of us before. Sometimes Americans are kind of slow to wake up. But when we do wake up, there's nothing like what Americans do. When we do wake up, we slam it like nobody's business. I'm running for president because it's time to slam it. And I think I have some ideas about how to do that. I have a 35-year career in inspiring people and motivating people. And at a time like that, that's not nothing. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Williamson. We'll turn it over to Katie first, and we'll come around here, and then we'll go over to the audience.
Thank you. How do you feel your passion for spiritual and motivational speaking will help you as president in a time of national crisis?
First of all, this is a time of national crisis. And my spiritual values are why I'm here. You don't let 13 million children be hungry in the richest country in the world. It's immoral. You don't let 100,000 children be homeless in the richest country in the world. That's immoral. You don't let millions of children have a subpar educational experience in the richest country in the world for no other reason than that their parents aren't rich. That's immoral. You don't spend all your money on ways to make war and hardly anything in comparison on ways to wage peace. That's immoral. You don't fail to address racial injustice and criminal sentencing. You don't fail to address mass incarceration. You don't fail to address mandatory minimums and the evil that they do. You don't fail to address the fact that the United States owes something to black people in terms of the economic gap. You don't fail to address what the United States owes to Native Americans. That's immoral. You don't fail to repair your earth, because if you don't do it, your children and your children's children might not even be able to breathe here. That's immoral. Did that answer your question?
Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong, because it's the first time on TV, so.
That's very sweet, actually.
So, your climate change program, the mass mobilization, it's mandatory enrollment from the age of 18 to 26 for 1 year?
No. What I did say, I have not said mandatory enrollment. What
okay.
I have said is this. I would not submit legislation, but what I have said is that I think it would be a very good idea to have a non-binding referendum, a referendum that would only be votes taken among American citizens between the age of 18 and 26. I want to hear what Americans between 18 and 26 have to say about this. So much of what I said tonight entails a huge shift, a huge season of moral repair. Everything from our schools to rural hospitals that are closing, to the need for infrastructure repair, for the regreening of our economy, for the regreening of our infrastructure, the regreening of our power grids. This goes beyond even what the Green New Deal itself will do. So what I have suggested is a referendum where people between the age of 18 and 26 will vote. And I think at the very least this will be a very healthy conversation in our society. And what I'd like to propose, if this referendum, the idea of this referendum, the yes and the no, the yes would be 1 year of mandatory national service for Americans between the age of 18 and 26. At one point, you would give 1 year to your country. If you want to be a teacher, great, because we really need you in one of these underserved schools. You want to be a doctor or a nurse, great. We need you in these rural hospitals that are closing as we speak. You want to be an architect, we really, really need you in order to repair a bridge or a hospital or whatever. So that's the idea, only of a referendum, not a mandatory, nothing mandatory, just a referendum.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Williamson, you spoke at the No Labels Convention yesterday, and Politics Fits You was there. And that organization's goal is to work about compromising and going across the aisle. Obviously, in the Senate, it's a Republican majority, and it's very hyper-partisan. How would you plan to get some of these plans passed, some of these in the art of the compromise?
Well, obviously, we have co-equal branches of government. The president does not have a magic wand, which right now, thank God. If you have a Democratic president, which we all, I believe, should be committed to having a Democratic president in 2020, then that president will have to be dealing, hopefully, with the Democratic Senate. We shouldn't just assume that it will be a Republican Senate. Everybody talks about you have to deal with a Republican Senate. Maybe not. Maybe not. And I know in my case, if the consciousness of this country is changed enough to elect me president, it's reasonable to assume the consciousness of this country is changed enough that maybe we'll have a Democratic Senate. Look what happened in the last midterm. So I don't think we should go around accepting that Mitch McConnell is going to be the next Senate leader. He absolutely might not be. But if it is a Republican, one would hope that it would be a Republican Party that has reclaimed its soul, because both major political parties need to do that right now. There would be more statesmen who would actually be willing to work in an honorable way with the president. If we do have, what you're mentioning, an obstructive Republican Party, where Mitch McConnell would be saying something along the line of what he said about Obama, our biggest goal is that Obama be a one-term president, then as president, I would not be timid with the use of executive power. I would not overuse or abuse the way this president does, but neither would I be timid. Neither would I just present an olive branch to someone who has already made it very, very clear he wants nothing more than to bite off my hand. The president has a lot of power. And if you have to be fierce and do what you can with the power of the presidency within the purview of the power of the presidency, then I'm prepared to do that.
Thank you. Now we'll turn it over to the audience for any potential questions out there. Just raise your hand and we'll get a mic right over to you.
Hi, thank you for being here. You talked a lot about inclusion. As a disability advocate, one of the things that I'm focused a lot about, really focused on, is how do we ensure that people with disabilities can be included in the community. Right now, there is a significant shortage of direct support professionals.
I'm sorry, the last thing you said?
There's a
Right
significant shortage of direct support professionals who are the people that enable folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities to be included in the community. We have Medicaid programs that fund long-term supports and services for folks, but we don't have enough people in the profession because we haven't invested in Medicaid programs properly. And as a result, providers can't pay direct support professionals a high enough wage. What would you do to better invest in Medicaid or some kind of other program so that way people with disabilities and aging folks and others have access to the support they need to be part of the community?
We are living at a time where the contest is not just on the outside, it's on the inside. That's why I'm saying it's not just about symptom, it's about cause. We're living at a great historical moment where the forces of exclusion are meeting the forces of inclusion head on, more dramatically than probably they ever have before. Imagine where the Pacific meets, the turbulence where the Pacific meets the Atlantic. Now, we as a country are posited. We are founded on this notion of unity and diversity. All men are created equal. The idea that all men are created equal and all men have inalienable rights. But we have never been challenged as we are challenged now to actually practice that. Now, in our past, we got to the point of saying that doesn't just mean white people, it also means black people. We got to the point where doesn't just mean men, it also means women. We have gotten to the point where it doesn't just mean gay, straight, it also means gay. But now there's an explosion of challenge. Now, some of us look and go, wow, it's so cool. Some people are gay, some people are straight, some people are transgender, some people are fluid, some people are Jewish, some people are Muslim, some people are Hindu, some people are atheists, some people are this, some people are that. Some of us look at that and go, wow, that's so cool. And part of that panoply of greatness is people who the world would call disabled. But no one's soul is disabled. Everybody just expresses their gifts and the essence of who they are in different ways. Now, at this point, for us to genuinely open, it is so big that at this point, we have to make a shift in our thinking to be alert to what is essentially an assault on the idea that everyone should have a fair shot. So, for instance, we had the American Disabilities Act, which at the time was a big step forward to expand it in all the ways you said. We already got marriage equality. Now we have to expand all that because of the assaults on transgender rights. This is a time where we need to not only stand for equality, but recognize, and you need a president who recognizes. This is not just about standing for equality of rights. It is about taking proactive measures to expand rights, particularly at a time when they are under assault and so many people would exclude rather than include.
So one of the things that I've noticed on the campaign trail is that there isn't too much of a discussion on prison population and prison incarceration rates. With America, we also happen to be the highest. We happen to have the highest incarceration rates in the entire world, and as a topic that is that concerns me and many other individuals who may not be in the room today, how exactly would you plan to work towards reducing that incarceration rate to more fit where we should be?
When I was in college, there were 300,000 people incarcerated in the United States. Today, there are 2.3 million. Today, building prisons is one of the largest, no longer the single largest, but one of the largest urban industries. Prison building and the prison industry is an example, and there are other examples in this country where people are making billions of dollars making human suffering a profit center. It's often been said about the And once again, how immoral is that? It's often said that when it comes to the U.S. Prison population, it's too easy to get in and it's too hard to get out. We have to deal, first of all, we need to legalize marijuana, and as soon as we legalize marijuana, we need to let out of prison all people who are there for prison-related activities. Not only should we allow people out of prison who are there for prison-related activities, we should actually scrap the box so that people don't even know that as they go forward in their lives. And I wouldn't even mind giving tax incentives to businesses that want to give people who have been in jail for prison-related activities an easier time restarting their lives. There are other issues of decriminalization of drugs that I'm very, very open to. There are way too many nonviolent drug offenders in the U.S. prison system. We also have to deal with lax standards of police engagement, particularly among populations of people of color. We have to deal with mandatory sentences. Mandatory minimums are an evil. The very idea of mass incarceration is an evil. Now, Obama did stop the issue of private prisons for federal prisons, but we need to do this on a state level as well. You know, on so many of these issues, as I've been saying, we have to look at the underlying problem. The underlying problem is that we have made corporate profits more important than people. That's where all of this comes from. And so I believe that it's a moral impulse that will make us ultimately change these things. I can tell you the policy shifts that have to be made, and I just told you some of the policy shifts that have to be made. But we have to do more than that. There needs to be a moral awakening among the American people. And when it comes to the U.S. prison system and mass incarceration, this is a deep immorality. Also, we need to have more and more programs within our prisons, our prison system. Other European nations, for instance, are much more ahead of us, much more progressive in terms of a consciousness of rehabilitation rather than punishment. There are so many things we can do, and that some states do. Some states are way ahead of others in terms of programs where the incarcerated are given more and more of a chance to rehabilitate their lives so that when they get out of prison, they are really ready to go to start again as a contributing member of society. But so many of our prisons actually are nothing more than crimes, schools of crime. People go in there as a low-level criminal and come out as a high-level criminal. There are so many things we can do when we change ideologically. Now, this is one of the many things where this is not something where a president can just have a magic wand and make this happen. You know, I see our current president and much of what has happened in this country as a kind of opportunistic infection that would not have occurred had there not been a societally weakened immune system. And when I said before there has to be a moral awakening, everything that I just said is an example. It's not enough that you have a president who says this policy or that policy. I don't want to go to Washington and fight for you. I'm going to go to Washington and co-create with you, because everything that you are just talking about that needs to be done on a federal level, everything we're talking about also has to be done on a state level. Every American needs to awaken, not just a president, not just a senator, not just a congressman. Every citizen is an immune cell in this country. We all have to awaken to the immorality, the public issue of public morality here, not private morality. Government has no business weighing in on your private morality, but these are issues of public morality. Mass incarceration is immoral. I don't want to get in front of you, sorry.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
I wonder if you could comment on the presidential debate process. And maybe, I watched you being interviewed about a month ago with somebody who kept interrupting you and would hardly let you get a word in edgewise, although you held your own quite nicely.
Was that the Anderson Cooper ambush?
It was. But I wonder if you could comment on the process and from my point of view, it seems like people interrupt each other, and it doesn't seem to be very well organized.
In my case, after debates, there was a lot of Marianne Williamson conversation. There was a lot written about me, a lot of enthusiasm. A lot of people in major newspapers around the country, major voices were saying, wow, she's the one she's having the conversation, outrageous truth that could defeat outrageous lies. There are people who have vested interests in leaving me out. I'm an outside-the-box candidate. But to me, that's the only place to be right now. The box is so toxic. And so within 3 days, and Anderson Cooper is an example, I had a wonderful interview on Anderson Cooper. I had a wonderful interview the night of the second debate with Anderson Cooper. And clearly, somebody didn't like that. Because within 3 days, it was like the hatchet came down. It was an ambush from Anderson Cooper. Here's a man ambushing me because I've had the audacity to proclaim that, I don't know, maybe Americans don't need to be on antidepressants quite so much, and that maybe, just maybe, the predatory pharmaceutical practices, which we know led to the opioid crisis, have something to do with the over-manufacture and perhaps over-prescription of antidepressants. What I said is not outrageous. Many healthcare professionals have said that we should perhaps be as concerned about the overprescription as the underprescription. Here is a man, and I'm sure he's a lovely man, Anderson Cooper, but this is a man who admits on the show he's on them, whose show is sponsored by Big Pharma, who has a segment called Keeping Them Honest, who comes after me. And everywhere you looked, newspapers, internet, the articles I saw about myself, danger to feminism. Her ideas are not funny, they're dangerous. She's anti-medicine. She's anti-science. She's anti-vax. She's dangerous. She's crazy. She's a grifter. This was all intentional. This was all very strategized. The talking points were all the same. All the articles used the same words. Somebody didn't want me back on that stage a third time. They didn't want me back there. And that's because they saw the energy that came from the second debate. Therefore, they created this false narrative. It's called character assassination. They created this false narrative of me as some wacky woman. The truth is, I've had a 35-year career. To people who have actually read my books or heard me speak, I'm a well-known entity. And nobody can find anything I've ever said, anything in any of my books, or any of my tapes that are anti-medicine. Yes, I'm a woman of faith. It's true, I pray for people who are sick. That doesn't mean I say don't go to the doctor. I've spent more time at chemo parties. I have helped women organize chemo parties. I have worked in hospitals. I can't believe in 2019 anyone has to justify or defend against the idea that, yeah, I believe there's a body-mind connection. So this was done to make sure that there would be placed in the consciousness of the average Democratic voter this idea that I'm a nut job. All that the DNC debates are a reality TV show. That's all it is. They're not a governmental authority. They're not part of the Federal Election Commission. What it is, you've got the DNC and their partners, the mainstream media. It's like boxing. Who's going to be fighting? And they say they have to narrow the field. No, they don't, actually. You know who should narrow the field? You. The people in Iowa are meant to narrow the field. The people in New Hampshire are meant to narrow the field. The people in South Carolina are meant to narrow the field. And the people in Nevada are meant to narrow the field. That's what the primaries are for. So this is all a system of a kind of political elite. And if you're not part of the club, you know what it is? It's the modern equivalent of the old party bosses who met in back rooms and decided who the candidate was. And last time it had to be her, and I don't think that worked out well. I think that if the DNC had left their finger off the scale, it would have been Bernie or it would have been Hillary, but we would have all felt good about it, and I don't think Trump would be president today. Today it's, okay, it can be one of these 5 or 6. And it's undemocratic. That's why I'm not going away. I don't know who you think I am. If you think I'm going to go away, let's go away quietly. And I'll tell you something. This is a long job audition. And you're not only looking at what people's policies are, you're looking at who people are and what they're made of. And if I can't take a few insults from Vanity Fair magazine or the DNC, why would you think I could take on Putin? You know, I'm tougher than that. So I believe that right now, what I see here, what I see in Iowa, what I see in South Carolina, and what I see in New Hampshire, which is where I am. You're very serious. You know what a profound responsibility is in your hands. I'm honored to be part of this process. You're doing your due diligence. You're listening to a lot of smart people. I'm not running against anyone. I'm running with a lot of really good people. I'm just telling you my vision. I believe that we're living at a time when it's not enough to have a political mechanic for president. We need a political vision. FDR said that the primary responsibility and job of the presidency is not the administrative aspect. He said that that's secondary. He said the primary job is moral leadership. And you can have the best car mechanic in the world, but the car mechanic isn't someone you ask, what road should we be on? And everybody talks about experience, and I understand that, especially with the current president. But the current president, I don't think his problem was lack of experience. It's lack of ethics. Lack of any visceral taste for democracy. Lack of any intellectual curiosity. So there's, you know, if you're going to talk about experience, very experienced politicians took us into Iraq. Very experienced politicians took us into Vietnam. We need moral certitude. We need moral certitude and vision in a president at this point. Do we need political mechanics? Of course we do, and I have great respect, for instance, for the other people who are running. That's who your vice president should be, the best political mechanic. That's who your cabinet secretary should be, your best political mechanic. But I can see what FDR was saying. We need a president today who has a larger vision of where we've been, how we got here, where we need to go, and it would help if it was someone who had a 35-year career in articulating such a vision and inspiring such a vision among many people. And for that, I'm your woman.
Do we have time for, oh, here's someone.
Pardon me for not getting up. I got a couple of new knees. Within your vision, I mean, given that today, I personally believe that you were being purposely marginalized by the Democratic Party. So you got quite a fight on your hands. Given that you survived that fight, I'd like to ask a foreign policy question. This century is going to be the century of China, India, and Africa. And it's going to have major economic consequences. So what I would ask you is, in general terms, you can't, obviously can't apply specifically, but what would your policy to solve the problem that we're having in Asia today be, and how would you implement it?
First of all, I want to answer the business about the marginalization by the Democratic Party. You're certainly correct. By their making sure I would not be on the debate stage, it created the idea that I'm not in there anymore. I need $1 million. I need $1 million in order to pay for TV ads, because I believe that when I'm in front of people, people see who I am, hear who I am, and then can make a decision whether or not you will feel on February 11th that I'm the person you choose to vote for. So I'm hoping that people will go to my website at marianne2020.com and give whatever amount is correct for you. Our average donation is $22 in order that I have the money for TV ads. That's number one. Now, in terms of Africa and China and Asia, the United States cannot be great if we're not good. Our power has always stemmed from our principles. Our power has always stemmed from the fact that we have core beliefs about democracy and about humanitarian values. That is always what has been our leadership, and it is always what has been our power. At this point, I had the honor of meeting the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama said that the United States is no longer seen by the people of the world as a champion of democracy and humanitarian values. That is what we must lead with. Right now, our absolute obsession with short-term profits for huge multinational corporations leads us to such short-term thinking This is why when you go to Africa today, you see signs all over the place written in Chinese. Now, this is the deal. We should not be thinking about how to dominate so much as we should be thinking about how to live our values, stand for something strong, stand firm, including with countries like China. But the fact that China is powerful is not something in and of itself we should have a problem with. We should just have a problem with the fact that part of their power is taking advantage of the U.S. worker, taking advantage of human rights, and so forth. But right now, even when we stand up to China, we're not standing up to China in the ways that would really impact the right of the U.S. worker to feel that the government was on their side. For instance, with our trade deals. We need to stand for the rights of the U.S. workers. We need to stand for human rights. Same with India and same with Africa. Africa presents such amazing opportunities for economic development in the years ahead. But at this point, we're having stiff competition not only from India for that, not only from China, but also from Russia, sir. But I'll tell you something that I think is even worse than that. And that is that in that continent is where you find the deep poverty. This is where you find the bottom billion. This is where you find 1 billion people who are living on $1.25 and less a day. This is where you find the other billion underneath that who are living on less than $2 billion a day. This is where you find 12,000 children starving a day. We need a mother in the White House, and you can take that however you want. And I'll tell you something. The first thing I'd want to do with Africa is ask at one of those fancy G7 meetings how the United States could take the lead in eradicating deep poverty from the planet. When we stand up for what is right, when we stand up for the eradication of deep poverty, when we stand up again for the cultivation of real democracy in the world, when we stand up for the cultivation of human values in the world, there will be so many people on this planet who would rather work with us than with China, who would rather work with us than with India, and who would rather work with us than with any other country, because they will see in us the light that people in the past have seen, a light that comes from the goodness of who we are.
And with that, I just want to thank you again, Ms. Williamson, for coming out to Franklin Pierce University for Pizza and Politics. It's an honor to have you here and to answer college students' questions and audience questions from the local residents. Now, Pizza and Politics isn't complete without pizza. It's over there on the table. And I believe that there'll be a little bit of time for pictures, things like that. And again, thank you so much, Ms. Williamson.
I appreciate you all very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.